At this point, we've all heard the word ego and have probably been accused of being egocentric at one point or another, or maybe not. The reality, however, is that, like most concepts, social media's use of the word ego is non-committal at best. And I can say that about any concept, really, so it's more about social media than it is about the ego, to be honest. But let's focus on the ego. If you're new here, welcome to my weekly rambles. My name is Faye, and I have notes. By the way, even when I don't say it, I do hope that your weekend was epic or polite. Either is a blessing depending on where you're at. This is episode 13, and I am patting myself hard on the back. Thank you as always for all the support. Now, what really is the ego? By definition, your ego is the rational part of your personality. This means that it is the part of you that exists in awareness of the social realities and norms and uses these when guiding your behavior. Like when there's a part of you that is horny in public, your ego is what checks in and tells you to stop squeezing your thighs together because someone in the room is looking at you weird. In an ideal situation, the other parts of your personality are able to defer to your ego before influencing your behavior. The other parts of your personality are the ID and the superego. The ID is the impulsive part of you. You see when a baby is near your face and they just want to put their finger in your eye. That is what the ID is like. It generates all your urges and impulses, allowing you to be illogical, irrational, and fantasy-oriented, with no consideration for others or for the world. For the most part, the ID is about seeking pleasure. I used to find it weird that if you're playing with a baby, they can get upset if you stop making a face or using a funny voice. But them being upset is very real and a result of their ID. They want what they want, and that's all there is to it. And I know you're thinking of someone who is like that, right? I think Safa from Dubai Bling is the poster child of the ID in action in an adult. Her consistent inability to be rational is quite something. Aside from the erotic impulses, the ID is also associated with violence and aggression. There are people who say they black out when they are upset and they go into violent rampages. It is a very dangerous thing, to be honest, because this is the state in which many violent crimes are committed. When the ID takes over, there is no rationality or thinking of consequences. The person becomes like a baby with no inhibitions. The superego, on the other hand, is the part of your personality that is shaped by the values and morals that you learned from your parents or guardians. So this is the part of you that is fully from your environment, and it is mostly responsible for your feelings of pride, accomplishment, guilt, shame, depending on what your ego says. Also, it is important to note that your superego is responsible for all that self-criticism that you experience. Which is why we say that the voice in your head that keeps tearing you down is never yours. It is mostly a result of the environment you grew up in. The superego starts to develop when you're 3 years old, and the development lasts until around 5 years or so. During this period, you are literally a sponge absorbing all the moral codes and values around you, and then later, these become the weapons that you use to tear yourself down involuntarily. Your superego is also responsible for anxiety and everything that is tied to what you believe to be your ideal self. The ideal self is not based in your reality, so it will not align with what your ego knows to be true. On the positive side, this might be motivational and allowing for growth. If I am unable to work out 5 days a week, my superego can burden me with heavy feelings of shame and guilt, like I am not good enough. My ego, on the other hand, is aware of my realities and will be more accepting of the fact that I tried hard enough by working out once this past week, considering how hectic my schedule was. If I am lucky and my ego is strong enough in this conflict, I emerge feeling accepted and understood. If the superego wins, I am left feeling like I failed myself and possibly defeated with little to no hope for my fitness goals. Now, the relationship between your ego and your superego is complex because while your ego is all about reality and social norms, your superego is about morality and whatever your parents or guardians taught you. So there are many instances when these two parts of your psyche will be in conflict with no easy resolution in sight. And that's just the human experience. The problem comes in when you start believing that your ego is bad, as social media may have been insisting in the last few years. As you may notice, you need your ego to keep your ID in check and to ensure that you don't completely and blindly become your parents or guardians or apply their rules to your life without thinking through them. So in these conflicts, your ego tends to be on the right path, while your ID is too impulsive and your super ego too moralistic. My favorite example when differentiating between the ego, the ID, and the super ego is a conflict where you are being criticized by your partner or a colleague or even a friend. Your ID is what gets you to snap back immediately because it is impulsive and unable to sit with uncomfortable feelings. Your super ego is the part of you that sits through the criticism and opts to show no emotion because you are supposed to not take things personally. Now, your ego in this instance will take the time to evaluate the criticism and see if it is based on facts, and then seek clarification or respond with some level of diplomacy as needed. And when I say as needed, I am telling you that your ego will not hesitate to write that strong-worded email, but only if the situation calls for it. I love the concept of the ego because of how rational it is. Sometimes, the conversation on egos sounds similar to that on shadows. And like your shadow, your ego is not a separate entity. It is not your other self that is only mentioned when you do something dumb. I let my ego take over and lost the love of my life. Honey, if your ego got you out of a relationship, it was definitely the better out. And unlike your shadow, your ego is your conscious self. So yes, do not be led by your shadow, but please be led by your ego. Always, if possible. So, what is my point, you ask? Well, thank you for asking. I don't have a point. I mean, obviously. Except that if anyone tells you to put your ego aside, feel free to educate them on why that would be a terrible idea. Without your ego, you are a baby swimming blind in the darkest and most turbulent waters. You need your ego to be rational and considerate, and a little less reckless in your decisions. And my favorite thing about the ego is that it is in a constant state of growth. Your experiences, mostly in relationships, can shape your ego. And for me, this has been very visible because I am now comfortable speaking up when I'm unhappy. Because my ego learned that I can and I should do that in order to be happy. So now, instead of acting out or sending that strong-worded text, I will evaluate a situation, sort through my feelings, identify the facts, and then engage my diplomacy muscles and communicate accordingly. In the past, I was all super ego, showing no emotion because it would be a sign of weakness to be hurt by someone else's words, blah, 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 blah. I was more of a shrug and bounce kind of person. But now I will really think about it and then insult you back if necessary, while crying if I feel like it, because that experience is very personal and I'm a very emotional person and I love it here. But don't be like me. Let your ego do what it wants to do, okay? I hope you learn to embrace your ego at the highest level possible. Fortunately, that's all I have time for today. Talk again next Monday, yes? Bye, babe.